Welcome to Corrective Consciousness, episode 203, the podcast where we explore the inanity of pop culture. I'm your host, vysethebold, and this is...
Lotus Prince.
And we got another really great show here for you. We've been on a roll here with these profiles that we've been doing on certain franchises, properties, and companies, and I wanted to take an episode here to at least talk a little bit about Sega. Sega has a long history, and obviously it's one of the gigantic companies that we would in video gaming. It has a lot to do with video gaming's history, so I don't even know how far we'll get, in other words, but I just want to kind of do what we've been doing, give you a brief history of the company, early history of the company, an overview of what happened to them, in past, and also go over, what the company means to us and how we were introduced to them. So I just wanted to get an opportunity to do all that. So Sega actually is a shortening of two words. Do you know what Sega stands for, Lotus?
I did, but I forgot what it was.
So Sega actually stands for Service Games.
Okay.
So actually, the original company was there actually like a bunch of like early companies, but basically in the early 50s and 60s actually is when like the start of the company actually came to be. So it was like, let me see here. I'm getting this off of Wikipedia, so you'll have to be kind to me in that. And this is not the best resource in the world, but apparently it started off as a post-World War II company. Irving Broomberg started up a company in like 31, and then there have been successive companies from there. But it was originally a Western company, and a company that was originally founded to bring games like slot machines and things like that to service members for the U.S. Army. So originally it was a Western-run company, which is pretty interesting because you think of Sega as one of like the big Japanese publishers. So it's kind of interesting that it started off that way, but eventually, it went from being run in Hawaii to being run in Japan, where eventually it would become Sega, and they did coin-operated distribution, not just for servicemen at that time. It was for everybody. So they had all kinds of things, kind of like Gottlieb or Bally would be in the United States. They kind of distributed all kinds of mechanical machines. And I think the first thing that they released was a game called Periscope, like a mechanical game called Periscope. So just something interesting there. They really didn't become a big name in video gaming until like the late 70s, early 60s, of course. So they were an early player.
Early 60s?
I'm sorry, early 80s. Yeah. You know what I meant. But their first big game was probably... They licensed Frogger for the United States, so that was a big game, but deal. That wasn't their game. That was Konami's game. They just published it. But their first big title that like had their name all over it was Zaxxon. So that would be an isometric shooter. It was also the first like isometric graphics game in general, I think, is how they tout it. That have you ever played Zaxxon?
I think I might have seen a little bit of it, but I've never played it.
So Zaxxon is one of those games that looks... It has such a cool look to it that's probably how it became a hit.
Well, yeah, it's like Dragon's Lair. The game's not great. I mean, I don't know about Zaxxon. Maybe Zaxxon is great, but Dragon Lair, you know it because of its style.
So with Zaxxon, it has that isometric viewpoint. So they kind of has a, even though it's all like drawn and it's all perspective, but it looks almost polygonal if you look at it, but it's not. It's just drawn in a very creative way to make you kind of perceive that it kind of looks like it's made out of polygons.
Well, isn't that
Like,
kind of like how Sonic 3D Blast works?
yeah, not too far off. It's one of those things, like if you look at the game, you'd be like, wow, that looks it looks a lot like it was made a lot later than '82, and it has a really neat look. It almost looks like it has kind of a similar play style to Scramble, which is one of Konami's early shooters, where you have to continue to blow up fuel stations on the ground in order to make sure that you have enough fuel to continue the game.
Well, you'd
And
think
it
normally
also,
you'd want to make sure not to blow up fuel stations to make sure you have enough fuel.
yeah, but that's how you collect them in both of these two games. But also, Zaxxon is really goddamn hard because of that isometric perspective. There are a couple things that will help you. They give you like a flight yoke, so that's kind of cool. It's one of those things that's like unique to the arcade experience. But so you pull up and you pull down on the just like with a real flight yoke. If you pull down, you move up on the screen, and there is like a flight meter that will tell you how high or how low you are. But it's kind of hard to tell because you have an isometric perspective as to your relationship with the ground. So when I was a kid, I would immediately die when playing this game because you would crash into things.
Yeah.
Because there's all kinds of things, and you can dodge things, but like it's hard to tell where they are in relation to you in terms of height. And I would imagine that the vast majority of people who played it were attracted by the way the game looked, but like would immediately die, just like I did. It wasn't until much later on, maybe when I was an adult, that I found out like the best way to play that game is to continue to shoot constantly so that your bullets hit obstacles, and then you know where to be in terms of height.
Oh, that's
because
clever.
that way you can tell by shooting in front of you, you could tell if your shots are clearing the obstacles or not.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, if the bullets keep going, then you can keep going.
Exactly. So, and also this was a game that had a very early version of a boss. Bosses are indelible in video games, but this was like one of the very first. It had the robot Zaxxon, which is basically almost like a old timey robot kind of looking guy. But I really like Zaxxon, but like after the fact, I hated it when I was a kid because I just didn't understand how to play, and I imagine that's the way it was. But for a while there, there were other Sega games too, and a lot of their ports of their arcade titles made it to the ColecoVision and the Atari. The ones on ColecoVision are particularly a lot of fun. I really like Zaxxon on the ColecoVision. It's pretty accurate. And then around that time, around the same time as the ColecoVision, Sega released their first system over in Japan called the SG-1000. What was kind of cool about this in retrospect is that it used basically the same processor as the ColecoVision. So a lot of games actually, have been fan ported back and forth for the SG-1000 and ColecoVision because, now of course there are a lot of Sega fans and they want to be able to play some of their early titles. So you can play a bunch of them on a ColecoVision these days if you really want to. And that, their system was a modest success. It wasn't like anything like as crazy as like Atari 2600 or anything like that in Japan, but it was only there in Japan. So they made a Sega Mark II after that, and it was very short-lived. It was only out for a very short amount of time, and I really don't even know much about the Mark II. But after that, the Mark III was made. It's kind of like the Atari 2600, just a very short-lived system that wasn't very, very successful. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the SG-1000 is home to Girls Garden, the first Yuji Naka title.
Oh, wow.
By the way. So it's like the first game that he programmed for it. There isn't too much to look back on and be like, hey, I want to play that, but there's some interesting stuff there. But the Mark III is actually the Japanese name of the Master System. So right. This is where Sega starts to make more and more of a foothold. This, of course, got a Western release. It was actually very popular in Europe and Brazil as well. And it was mildly popular in the United States. But if you were anything like me, I didn't even know about the Master System existing.
I hadn't heard of it until well after the Genesis.
I didn't know about it until way too late, and it was one of those things like Nintendo was so ubiquitous with video gaming that the video games were called Nintendos, that kind of thing. And
yeah, your mom would be like, "Are you playing Nintendo?" when you like don't own a Nintendo.
Yeah, I remember seeing a commercial for the Master System when I was a kid because we had this is really dating me, but we had a taped off a TV version of Karate Kid. Like that's how I watched Karate Kid when I was a kid.
Sure.
A lot of people had movies that were taped off a TV, and that's how they.
Oh yeah, I had a few of those. Disney's Sword in the Stone, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Secret of the Ooze, to the second one.
So. It was one of the oldest taped off a TV things that we had in my house. So it was actually kind of cool to watch it because it had the oldest commercials. So it's a shame now because like I think that particular tape is long gone, but it would be one of those ones that I would want to digitize.
You know what my old school tape was that I don't even remember what the tape was, but it had the oldest video game related commercial I'm aware of.
What's that?
It wasn't actually a video game, but it was the Nintendo cereal.
Oh, the Nintendo like cereal system or breakfast system or something like that.
Yeah, the Mario and Zelda cereal.
Yeah, and it had like 2 bags of cereal in it.
Yeah,
like
Mario and Zelda. Weird. Yeah, like the 2 different sets of the same shit. It's like Alphabets and Lucky Charms. It's the same shit, but like as a kid, it was like, what?
But yeah, like it just had like some old stuff that I looked back on it and I was like, I wish I could have played that, that kind of thing. Like you saw things like ports of Space Harrier on the Master System and things like that, and it's just like exciting. I should reiterate that by this point, Sega was making really awesome arcade games at the same time. They were making essentially Yu Suzuki was making all of the titles that made him famous. Like you had Outrun, you had Space Harrier, Afterburner, then later G-Lock, and the Star Wars inspired one, I forget which one that one's called, Thunderblade, all of those big titles from back then, and they were really, 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 really popular for back in the day, and they looked amazing. Sega was always on the cutting edge of the cool look back in the day, and especially
that's the thing. Yeah, Nintendo was very family friendly. Their system is literally called the family computer, but yeah, Sega was like cool and like attitude, at least in America.
Oh yeah, but they always had a style about them. That was one of those things, and they became known during this era for having like blue skies all the time, and
Yeah.
that's what like Sega fans always point to, blue skies, because they always have this like feeling of adventure and discovery and positivity, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, like Outrun is like on a bright sunny day.
Exactly.
Revenge of Shinobi, it's called Revenge.
Sonic the Hedgehog, yeah, like Green Hill Zone.
Yeah, but like Revenge
has
of
that.
Shinobi, like you're out on a mission to kill a guy, and like unless you're doing a nighttime mission, blue sky.
Yeah. They're very Skies of Arcadia is also like a game that is my one of my favorite RPGs, my namesake. Indelible of the Sega style and Sega blue skies.
And even
it's just one of
Yakuza,
those
like
things.
Yakuza was largely a fixed camera angle game. You'd have to play it on the original PS2 to see that, but like starting in Yakuza 3 when you got full camera control with the right stick, like in HD, look up, blue sky.
Oh yeah, it's just one of those things. They love that feeling of adventure and positivity and like high flying and expansion and all that kind of stuff. So and having like the breezy fun attitude. So
And music to complement.
Oh yeah, exactly. So the Master System was a great system. But unfortunately was very hampered in the United States by Nintendo's practices and at the time. So really only like this was like an underground hit, very much like the TurboGrafx 16. It wasn't a real competitor to the Nintendo here, the NES. I like me and Lotus said, there were lots of us that didn't even know this thing existed.
Yeah, I'd never heard of the Master System and the TurboGrafx until way later.
No. I knew about the TurboGrafx because of television commercials. I did know about that. And I knew about the Master System just barely because of that one commercial. But I never saw it at stores. I never never went to go try to find it. It was like one of those things.
I knew about Nintendo cereal.
The big thing about Master System was that it had like a lot of really good ports of their arcade titles. Like you had Outrun on there. It was obviously not the same, but it was still a really good version of Outrun. Space Harrier didn't look nearly as cool as the arcade version, but it played pretty darn well for an 8-bit version. In fact, the Master System had a better processor than the NES at the time, so it had more colors and it had more sprites on screen. So like there were some games that were really cool on it. There were also a few titles that were better than the NES counterparts. One of them was like Double Dragon. Double Dragon was more of an arcade port on the Master System, but kind of had its own feel to it. And the NES version kind of had a hampered one-player only version of Double Dragon. So this one was 2-player. There were some really fun titles on here.
Oh, and wasn't there? I forgot if I might be confusing things. I forgot if this was the Master System or the Game Gear. But wasn't there like that one Ninja Gaiden title?
So I am a huge fan of Sega's Ninja Gaiden, and I call it Sega's Ninja Gaiden because even though it's a Tecmo property, Sega made the Ninja Gaiden for the Master System. It is one of the best games on the system, if not the best, if you ask me.
It's very well animated. Like I've always
love
noticed, when you climb a ledge, it looks really good. There's a little flippy-do.
Yeah, it's extremely well animated and plays very smoothly, and it plays unlike anything else. It is a unique game, so it is not a port of the NES game or anything like that, or even the arcade game. It is its own deal, and it was only released in Europe and Japan. It never got an official U.S. release, so we wouldn't have gotten that back then. Thankfully, because of better distribution, buying things off eBay, things like that, retro interest, that kind of thing. We have copies of it over here that you can get, but it was a lot of fun. but it had a port of the original Shinobi, which was a really good port. Not perfect, but really good. It wasn't too hampered. It got the idea right, and it felt like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean,
And
it makes me think of Golden Axe on the Genesis instead of the arcade. Some animations are missing, but it's the same game, with few
yeah,
exceptions.
yeah. I mean, it doesn't have the graphics of the original Shinobi, but like the gameplay feels exactly like it, and the graphics are a little plainer, but they're not bad either. So yeah, if you want to go back to the Master System, I definitely recommend you try those. There's lots of other games I could go into, but we only have so much time because we're going over the company as a whole. But the Genesis is really where and Mega Drive in Japan and Europe
Well, yeah,
is
Mega
where
Drive
this system.
everywhere but the U.S.
Yeah, yeah. It's probably a rights issue or something.
No, I think it
Was
is. Yeah,
really
it's like why the Dreamcast has like a blue spiral in Europe. I think it was like too
yeah
close to some company's logo or whatever
logo.
over there.
Yeah. So, the Genesis was a big deal when it came out because you have to remember that really, like the NES was getting long in the tooth. It was like 1989. It was around for like 3 or 4 years, and the Genesis comes out and it has like a near arcade perfect version of Altered Beast.
Yeah, and the thing to remember, by the way, is that if you know Alter Beast, it's not a great game. It's
It
very
looks cool
slow.
though.
It's pretty tough. What was it?
It looks cool though.
That's what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
at this point, people are a little more forgiving of like graphics. Like, oh, it doesn't have to be perfect 4K for me to want to play it. But back then, if you compare, like, Mario is an infinitely better game than Altered Beast. But if you look at a screenshot of Mario next to Altered Beast when you've never played either one before, you are obviously going to go with Altered Beast. Look at how much more realistic it looks, and like you just said, it's like nearly arcade perfect. It like that's a strong opener for a console's launch. Like we can do the arcades and we can do them right.
Yeah, like the Genesis had a similar processor to a lot of Sega's arcade games at the time. It was weaker, but not so much that it was easy to tell.
Well, not only that, but
it
like
was
the
one of those
games are of
things.
course designed around its abilities. Like
Yeah.
another thing that's important to remember is that now games are usually released on every system except for like Mario. Nintendo's very protective of its first party titles, but like
Sure.
which should I get? The Xbox One version or the PS4 version for like every game ever made? But in the Genesis and SNES's time, there were some games that were released on both systems, like Earthworm Jim and stuff like that. But for the most part, each system had an almost completely exclusive library. So what this meant is, like Vice was saying earlier, you're not going to play a Nintendo game on the Genesis and go, oh, this is clearly an inferior port. Like, for the most part,
It was completely different.
yeah,
games.
the games were just like the
completely
Genesis
different
games were made for the Genesis, the Super Nintendo and the regular Nintendo games were made for those systems. So they played according to, like they played as intended, is what I'm saying. Like there were some cases you could compare Mortal Kombat 1, you could compare Earthworm Jim, but like for the most part, the Genesis games work well on the Genesis, the Nintendo games work well on the Nintendo.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Genesis because I had one back in the day. So
Yeah, same.
this was a big deal. Now it's easy to see back then why it was cool. One of the things that early Sega did before it got really big was, if you take a look at its early library, a lot of the games were celebrity endorsed in some way. So you had Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, which was one of the very
Yeah.
first games for the system.
Charles Barkley, Shut Up and Jam, the not funny one.
Well, not quite that yet because that was later, but
Okay.
there was like Tommy Lasorda's Baseball.
Yeah.
Let's say you had Joe Montana football. Talking Football after that. So you had a lot of like celebrity endorsed products. Bo Jackson Boxing was a big title. These were all big early titles, and they had great graphics compared to the NES, and were much faster games, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it just felt like a little bit more grown up, which is what was appealing. Like a lot of teenagers and college students loved the Genesis, and then Sonic the Hedgehog came out and changed everything. The system wasn't super popular until Sonic 1 came out. Sonic the Hedgehog 1 really changed the game.
And speaking of changing the game, didn't Sonic the Hedgehog introduce the concept of idle animations?
Oh yeah. There's a bunch of things that were pioneering about that game. And that basically was Sega's answer to Mario, but it's really a different kind of game.
Yeah, it's very different.
Get down to it. It's more of a game about momentum. Whereas
especially
Mario's
Sonic
more
1.
about platforming. Sonic's more about like keeping your speed and finding out how you can use it to your advantage.
Like Mario's momentum is like when you slide down a hill and knock out Goombas. Like it doesn't really, they don't really do much momentum. But yeah, Sonic, like if you run into a wall and press down, nothing happens. You have to have actual speed, so you can do that little spin and bust through a wall. That was another thing. You could just break through walls, in certain walls in that game. And there were secrets everywhere. Mario had secrets, obviously, but Sonic had a ton of hidden areas where you could get like extra lives or whatever, and there was the concept of the special stages. And again, the idle animations, Sonic's whole thing was advertised as speed, even though Sonic 1's actually a pretty slow and deliberate game.
Blast processing is what they called it, yeah.
Yeah, which is just a bunch of bullshit. But Sonic 1 is actually a pretty slow and deliberate game because you can go fast, but it's not safe to do so. But the thing is, each level had a timer, and Mario's did too. But with Mario, if you're ever running low on time, they would play a little warning jingle and then play the song faster. Sonic did not do that. But if you ever stopped moving, you just put the controller down for a second, eventually Sonic would tap his foot and look directly at the camera, like look at you, like, are you going to play the game or what? And that was just like such a radical concept back in the day.
If you leave it long enough, he even just like hops down and pieces out. And
well, no, that's Sonic CD.
Oh, okay.
That's Sonic CD. And I think it's an instant game over too.
Yeah.
Like, fuck you. Like, in Sonic 1, I don't know how it's even possible to take over 10 minutes in a Sonic 1 or a Sonic 2 level, but if you do, you lose a life. But in Sonic CD, he just says, I'm out of here, and he just jumps, like, toward the foreground, which makes no sense in the levels he's in, just off the camera, and I think it's just a game over.
Yeah. So, this is around the time when I'm going to talk about my personal experience here. We had a Nintendo all growing up, me and my brother. I have an older brother. He's 7 years older than me, so he was a teenager, during a lot of my young life. So, it was getting towards the end of the NES lifespan, and we had a few games. We had we had Mario 1, Mario 2. We had Zelda 1, and we had Contra and baseball, and Nintendo Baseball, and Blades of Steel, and that was about it. We didn't ever really get too many games. Oh, and I was so young that I even got like the Sesame Street ABC's 1, 2, 3's
game. Oh, there we
go. When I was that young, yeah. So but that was about it for what we had initially, before I got into collecting and buying my own games and all that stuff. But and we had Donkey Kong Classics. We also had Donkey Kong Classics.
Oh, fair enough.
Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. on it. So after that, my brother was like, okay, we got to get a Genesis. And this was right around the time, I think it was just before Sonic 2 came out. So we got Sonic 1 and the Genesis, and I think we got Streets of Rage 2 with it, because that's right around when Streets of Rage 2 was coming out. And he plugged it in, and I saw Green Hill Zone for the first time. Like, I hadn't seen it in the store or
It's
anything
so
like
bright.
that.
The
So.
Sonic character is bigger than the Mario character, like the sprite. Yeah.
And the music is like that
Oh, it's
FN
iconic.
synthesis music is so much different than an NES soundtrack. It was like the future for
Yeah,
me.
and especially the game over, like the old Sega sound, like like the Nintendo can't even do that sound.
Uh, I thought it was incredible when you first hear the boss theme. The when you fight Robotnik for the first time,
And by
it
the way,
has
speaking of which,
those drums.
considering how upbeat Sega is, Sonic the Hedgehog 1's boss theme is pretty gloomy.
Yeah, it's a dark song, and
Yeah.
it has like those boom 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 boom, like those deep
Yeah.
bass drum sounds.
Yeah, and especially like God forbid you did this as a kid, but if you ever made it to Scrap Brain Zone,
Oh yeah.
that track is so good.
But when I was a kid, and with all of that going on, and then you have that ball, the wrecking ball, that
Oh yeah.
looks like the future just because of the way that it looks. It looked polygonal to me because of the
Yeah, it
way
has
that
a little
it's
bit of a
drawn.
3D look with the shading.
Like incredible with the parallax scrolling of
Oh
Green
yeah.
Hill Zone in the background. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, and I was hooked. It was revelatory, and there are very few things that like made me feel that way in video gaming. It's just one of those things. Like you saw it and you just shat your pants. Like it was just so cool. What was your experience? How did you get introduced to the Genesis
Okay, so yeah,
Lotus?
mine was a little different. My family did not have a video game system growing up. I think there was one like New Year where like our cousins were over. We rented an NES just over the
Oh, okay,
weekends,
sure.
and I remember getting three games. One of them was the Donkey Kong collection, which my dad and my uncle got into. They were playing Donkey Kong. They weren't a big fan of Donkey Kong Jr. because that game is actually way harder. We got Ninja Gaiden. I don't even think I remember the title at the time, but like it clearly had the ninja on it. That game did
Sure.
not work. So I never knew how incredibly hard that game was until way later.
Also,
And
you're touching on something there. Like the Nintendo had a hard time getting it going because like it had like a funky lever in it,
and this was back
press
then.
down.
This wasn't like now
Yeah,
with the
no,
30-year-old
back then.
system. This was in like the 90s.
You had to get the magic touch to get your game to run correctly, even back then.
But like two of our three games worked. That was not one of them, so I figured it was
Yeah,
just a game. And the third was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, which my brother and I and my cousins were super into.
really
But
cool.
when we were little kids, like we only made it ever to the third level once. We usually just
It's a
died
hard
on
game
Bebop or
too.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I'd gotten a kick out of the game, and like our neighbor had Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I got like past a few guys in that game, but wasn't really very good at it. I would
Bald
sometimes
Bull
just
or Piston Honda usually are like the first
yeah, I don't even
stopgaps.
remember how far I got as a kid, but I remember using codes to try to go to some of the later fights, and I was like, these are impossible. I don't know what you're supposed to do for these. But that was mostly my Nintendo experience. Like one guy I knew back when I lived in New York had like that World Cup Soccer, which I thought was cool, but I touched it once and then never again, you know?
Love World Cup Soccer, great game.
And I think I had seen somebody with a Genesis with Sonic 1 like once, but that was about it. But for some holiday, some years later, our aunt and uncle got our family a Model 2 Genesis, so it came with Sonic 2. Like, I didn't own Sonic 1 until way later. So we got Sonic 2, so my experience was kind of like yours, but it was with Emerald Hill Zone. And I remember when I heard of Green Hill Zone, I was like, that sounds familiar, it's not quite right. But yeah, Sonic 2 was Emerald Hill Zone. So I remember, like, because I played Sonic 2 before Sonic 1, it threw me off that in Sonic 1 you couldn't spin dash. But in Sonic 2, it was super fast. I remember really having an affinity for like the music in Chemical Plant Zone. It just stuck with me. That do 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 do. Also, my
The
brother
music,
and
in Sonic 2 is
Sonic
so
2's music
good.
is freaking otherworldly. And it sounds very different from Sonic 1's music as well. But my brother and I would occasionally do the versus mode, which exists in Sonic 2. I don't even know how many people remember that that's a thing, but there's a versus mode in Sonic 2 where you just race each other through. You pick them, but it's one of like 3 or 4 levels.
It has its unique music too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's Emerald Hill Zone, there's Casino Night, there's Mystic Cave. Maybe that's it. There might be one more, but it was cool by itself. And I remember learning the codes to get.
I think there's Casino Night Zone.
No, I said that.
It's Casino Night Zone, Green Hill Zone, and
Mystic Cave.
Mystic Cave. I think it's the only.
It's just the 3.
Yeah.
Okay. And I remember learning the codes to get to level select and to get Supersonic, because I didn't unlock Supersonic legitimately until like over a
very
decade
few people
later.
back then did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very happy when I did it on stream a few years back. Like, I just played through the game straight. Sonic 1, I used the level select code to like keep going back into the bonus zones, but I did still play through the game properly. But yeah, I remember I'd only seen a little bit of Sonic 3, like a friend had it or something, and I remember hearing about like, oh, after you get all the emeralds and you beat the game, you get the super emeralds, and I thought that was some like school bus rumor that isn't true because it just sounds stupid, but it's actually true, and if you look at it, it's amazing. But I remember like, there's a level where if you play 2 players, you could play as Tails and pick up Sonic and fly across like half the level. I'm like, what? Like, this is really? So I remember thinking that was so cool, seeing like the final boss of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Well, I don't even mean the Doomsday Zone. I mean like the regular final boss of Sonic 3 with that super oppressive, amazing music that has like a drop before songs with drops were a thing by like 2 decades. I remember thinking that was super cool, but I didn't own Sonic 1 or 3 until forever later. But I remember my family, I don't remember if we owned it or borrowed it, but we had the Sega 6-pack, which we played Streets of Rage 1 and Golden Axe 1 a ton.
Yeah, I think Super Hang-On's on that, maybe?
Yeah, we didn't really touch that one. We played some Sonic 1 on it, and a little bit of Revenge of Shinobi, but that game's freaking hard. I remember I think we had like rented Shinobi 3 with that awesome music. It's not Yuzo Koshiro, but that music freaking kills every single time. There was also, we had a little bit, I don't even remember how I got my hands on this, maybe a rental. We played like Battletech a little bit. We owned Mortal Kombat 1 at a point. Later
it was
we
Super
got
Hang-On, Revenge of Shinobi, Sonic 1, Streets of Rage, Columns, and Golden Axe. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, we never touched Super Hang-On or Columns. But we had Mortal Kombat 1, we used the code on for the violence. We had 3 Ultimate later, like Ultimate 3. We got I think we did own Streets of Rage 2 at a point. And that game, I mean, you've already covered that. Streets of Rage 2 is freaking incredible. Streets of Rage 1 really is a solid game, but 2 just kills.
Streets of Rage 2 is one of the best video games of all time. You can't really say that about Streets of Rage 1. I mean, Streets of Rage 1 has one of the best soundtracks of all time.
Yeah, Streets of Rage 1 is really good, but 2 just, like, it's not even
2
close.
is just straight up one of the best games of all time. It's so good.
Yeah, like, I remember, because I think I've said this on the podcast before, but Mr. Ryu and I were, like, arguing which was better, Final Fight or Streets of Rage, because I grew up with Streets of Rage and he grew up with Final Fight. And I think we kind of settled it with Final Fight is the better series, but Streets of Rage 2 is individually the best game.
See, Final Fight has...
Streets of Rage 1 does not stand up to Final Fight, and Streets of Rage 3 is, like, not very good. Bare Knuckle 3 is freaking amazing, but we didn't have that, you know?
And we only just got Streets of Rage 4, so...
Yeah, I mean, obviously that doesn't count. We had this debate, like, a few years ago. But,
Sure.
But Streets of Rage 1 is a great game, but, like, it doesn't stand up to Final Fight. Streets of Rage 2, though, like, that is just the crown champion.
Yeah, I mean, Streets of Rage 2 versus the original Final Fight, you're gonna have a tough battle there on which one's better.
Super Nintendo Final Fight, Streets of Rage 2 probably wins, but arcade Final Fight, that's tough.
I'm gonna lead with Streets of Rage just because it's my favorite. But
yeah, I got nostalgia for it.
I can't tell you which one's actually better. You know, like it's one of those things.
Although, again, though, I will have to admit, Bare Knuckle 3, like Japanese Streets of Rage 3, really, really good, but you gotta, like, go find it.
Fucking great. Yeah, it's fucking great. And you need to get a fan translation of it.
Yeah, or that 360 download or whatever.
There is nothing really that has the Japanese version officially translated.
Oh, okay. So I guess all you can
yeah.
do is get Streets of Rage 3 then?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, yeah,
you might be
I
able
have
to
it
play
via,
Bare
like,
Knuckle
Sonic
3 with the
Genesis
Japanese
Collection.
text, but it has a lot.
Okay.
The text has a lot to do with what you need to do in that game.
Well, that's true, yeah. Streets of Rage 3 actually has, like, a plot with dialogue.
Yeah, no, it's actually important because at one point you have to like find a bomb and like you have to find it within the game, and there's a time limit and everything. So like, it's,
I mean, you don't need
important.
you don't need the English for that, but I mean, when you find the guy, I mean, there's talking in the game, so you need to be able to read it. I mean, if you just want to beat the game, then it doesn't really matter. But I mean, come on.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that really hammers down, what the system means to us.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
kind of like
I will say
overview.
this. You said you had like a revelatory experience with Sonic 1. I kind of had that with 2, although because I had like a taste of the Genesis earlier. I would say probably my revelatory experience, because I just skipped the Saturn. I didn't know like almost anything about it forever. But my friend had a Dreamcast, and he introduced me to Phantasy Star Online 1 and Soul Calibur 1. And I was very excited when Phantasy Star Online 1 and 2, couldn't believe that, came out for the GameCube. I was like, oh, I could finally play this. But Soul Calibur 1, that didn't get ported until like the 360. So like, it's Dreamcast or nothing. So like, I remember loving playing that game in the Dreamcast, because like, compare any fighting game at the time to Soul Calibur. Those graphics and smoothness and the 3D effects and the attention to detail were like unparalleled. So my revelatory experience wasn't just playing Soul Calibur 1, but it was like a lot of times when games are about to come out, I'm like, oh good, I'll pre-order them if there's a collector's edition, or like I look forward to getting to this one. But like, I've never done this before or since. When Soul Calibur 2 was... Because I knew Soul Calibur 1 was a lost cause. I didn't have a Dreamcast. But when Soul Calibur 2 came out for the GameCube, I like, was waiting at the entrance of my mall before it opened. I was, like, giddy.
Oh, boy.
Like, I've... Resident Evil 4, I flipped out when that was coming out, but I have never gotten to the mall before it opened. That was the one. Soul Calibur 2. Not even a Sega game really anymore, but like, that was because of the effects of Soul Calibur 1. I was like, I can own a Soul Calibur game? No way. And I was similarly not as flipping out excited, but I was quite pleased when Phantasy Star Online 1 and 2 came out for the GameCube as well. That was also like, oh, I can own this. Because like, I didn't realize it at the time, but like, nobody had a freaking Dreamcast, so that's when they started porting all their games to Nintendo and Microsoft. So like, same goes with Sonic Adventure 1. I saw level 1 of Sonic Adventure 1 with the killer whale, and so when I saw that 2 was released for the GameCube, I was like, that's awesome. But when I saw 1DX for the GameCube, that was another time where I made like a special mall run, because this is when I was like driving my parents' car with like I must have had a license at that point, but I must have been like 17 or something. I was like, I am getting Sonic Adventure DX now. So that was another one of those really good times.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to kind of make that as a tease for maybe a second part at some point, because
the later Sega stuff.
Yeah, because we are getting a long in the tooth here, and we still have our fan segment to go. I mean, we haven't even touched later arcade titles. We haven't even gotten into the 3D realm, Virtua Fighter, and I haven't even talked about, honestly, we didn't even do the Sega CD and 32X, which are both important to my history. We haven't done the Saturn. We haven't done modern Sega. So
certainly not. I mean, you've heard how much I talk about Yakuza.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty to talk about there, and also like Sega has had several mergers. They
Oh yeah.
merged with Sammy, and then they've merged with Atlas more recently. So those are big. Especially the second one is a big deal. Because of the current landscape of things. So
You get Persona equipment and Sonic Forces, which is the
yeah,
weirdest thing.
and we also have them becoming a third party and spreading across all the different platforms. So
Oh yeah, we haven't even graduated from they're not making consoles anymore.
exactly. So we'll have to revisit this topic and do another part one of these days for sure. I don't know whether it'll be next week, or not, but we will continue on with another profile and talk about what those platforms mean to us and everything like that at a later date. Why don't we move on to fan segment here?
Of course. So we have a few comments here. Living Corpse left 2. One of them is about, we were talking about the Snyder cut of what was it, Justice League?
Justice League, yeah.
And he goes, Snyder cut? Oh boy, this is gonna be like Halloween 6. 2 versions and they both suck. Yeah, probably.
It's like Highlander 2.
Yeah.
The director's cut. Fuck off.
And then the other comment by Living Corpse was, Metal Gear Solid 4 had the Assassin's Creed outfit Old Snake wears early on in the intro, and you can also unlock it by feeding the gorillas your rations. That's pretty rad. And then Connor says, 80 Days is a great adaptation of the novel Around the World in 80 Days. It was originally a mobile game released in 2014, and it came to Steam in 2015. It's a visual novel, but incorporates some interesting resource management mechanics, too. There are tons of branching paths, and it has some of the best writing I've ever come across in a game. Wow. Just wanted to give it a mention, as it's an underrated gem. It's well worth the play. I didn't know that was a thing, so that's pretty rad.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing, and I also missed a big one, just because we were talking and I got distracted.
Oh, what, games that have different books?
Yeah, the Shin Megami Tensei series
really?
hails from a novel, yeah.
Actually, now that I think about it, well, no, go ahead if you're going to say anything more about that.
Well, there was a novel called Megami Tensei, which is a digital devil story. That was the original novel, and then they made the Megami Tensei games for the Famicom, and then they made Shin Megami Tensei, which was like the new one. Yeah.
Actually, one thing I forgot to mention, which is embarrassing because I'm currently playing it, but the Suikoden series comes from like a novel about these great heroes, like this Chinese novel.
Is it the Water Margin?
I don't remember the title. It might be, but yeah, Suikoden is like inspired by that story.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and there are plenty of other games. I mean, like the Dynasty Warriors games are based off of the
well, that's not a novel. That's
Kingdoms
history.
novels. Yeah, but no, like a lot of the characterizations come from the novelization of historical events.
Well, no, that comes from Magic the Gathering Portal 3 Kingdoms.
Okay.
Portal 3 Kingdoms invented Lu Bu and Cao Cao.
Okay.
Wizards of the Coast created it all. Alright, so School Filmer says, now that I'm thinking about it, I remember another aspect of the limited animation spectrum. You know, that 60s animation we were talking about?
Sure.
Because that was School Film was question. And this one lives up to its terminology. Clutch Cargo. This one has stills. Yeah. I don't know this one. This one has stills with only the mouth moving, and they are in fact recorded mouths that have been overlaid on the stills. Oh, okay, I have heard of that. I've seen that done as like a joke on like Nickelodeon shows.
Well, it's you would have seen it in Pulp Fiction when little Butch is watching TV.
Oh, jeez. Okay, I was like, did they do that? Okay, so they're in fact recorded mouths that have been overlaid on the stills. Synchrovox, I think it was called. The last time I saw something like that was in Team Neighborhood's 4th episode with a sight gag and the TV playing something similar in execution to Clutch Cargo. Imagining a game's dialogue scenes with that kind of animation would get really freaking weird really fast. You know, this doesn't actually do it, but I'm just kind of imagining like a Katamari game doing something weird like that. in the cutscenes. And there were also the educational games I played back then. Those are also translated to Norwegian, like Reader Rabbit. Oh, Reader Rabbit, that takes you back. And now I can't wait to show the twins Cyber, Drac, Cool Yas from Mars, Rat and Bat, Love and Hate. Heck of a mouthful of a title. God damn, where do you find this stuff?
I used to play Blaster Master when I was a kid.
Blaster Master?
Or, no, Math Blaster, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Math Blaster Episode 1 in Search of Spot. Or in Search for Spot, whatever. Yeah, I remember that was the only game that my family ever owned that had 5-inch floppy disks. Because I didn't know that those existed at the time. Our computer... Oh, no. I knew that those existed, but we never had them. Like, our computer had the 3.5-inch floppy drive.
Sure.
But this copy of the game came with 3.5-inch and 5-inch. Like, which one are you going to use? You know, whatever makes sense for your computer. So I was like, whoa, actual floppy disks. Because that's why they're called floppy disks, because they were floppy.
They were floppy, yeah.
Like, it's crazy. Now I have some Infocom games that I got at a book sale that had the floppy disks.
It's just kind of cool to have them.
Yeah, so look at this. Yeah. I got... Zork 3? It's one of the Zorks that is not the first one.
Gotcha.
So anyway, our question comes from Kurogachi. What are your thoughts on remakes of games that were perfect? I mainly ask this because lately there's been a lot of remakes, and I think the remake train is still speeding towards more and more popular titles. This, in part, is good because we get to see the new generation of players play this gem for the first time with a fresh coat of paint, but at the same time some developers are cutting content, adding filler, and the main issue for me, changing the feel and the way the game was meant to be played. The main suspects are Resident Evil 3 and Final Fantasy 7, but there's plenty of remakes. Well, that's kind of where I was going, but I was going to go in a different way with this, is that, like, in some cases, even though I love the fixed camera angle and tank control thing, because that's how Resident Evil 1 through 3 were designed to be played, it makes it creepier that way. But at the same time, can you imagine releasing a fixed camera angle game in a non-indie format today? Like, Over the Shoulder makes more sense for modern sensibilities, and you could still make a game scary that way. It's just the game's going to be very different in attitude, and so it is. So Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil 2 remake are. So, like, you get to have the new generation experience that thing you love, but with a modern coat of paint, so they don't have to go like, what? How is this game even playable? You know, if the new generation of gamers played Final Fantasy VII Original, they'd probably be like, I kind of get it. So they get more of an appreciation for it now, I would imagine.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of times when the game comes out and it was perfect for its day and time.
That's the thing. Like, Resident Evil 4 was perfect,
absolutely.
But today it's like, I can't control the camera. What is this?
Yeah, it was chef's kiss at the time. There was nothing ever like it, and it was completely groundbreaking.
And not to mention, this is going a little bit tangential, but you know how some like Mario titles, for example, you know how, like, if you ever read trivia on some Mario titles, it says, like, this game did the most with the system that it could, but then the next Mario game looks better, and you're like, so the previous one didn't do the most of the system? But it's like they did the most that they knew how to do at the time. So, like, even within the same system's lifespan, I've used this example before, but look at Uncharted 1 and Uncharted 3, both on the PS3. 3 clearly looks better than 1, so, like,
big difference.
There is a degree of evolution to be had even at the time some amazing game was released, so things could be improved upon. Now, cutting content, yeah, I understand that could be obnoxious, but I suppose it depends on what's cut, because on one hand, I'm against cutting content just because I know it to have been in there, so I want to see it again on principle, but on the other hand, was it really necessary, though? There are some parts of games that, like, maybe haven't aged well from a gameplay perspective or from, like, a writing perspective that they're like, we can do without. There might be some aspects of tedium. I mean, especially for games like Final Fantasy VII, where if you want to grind, you have to run around in a circle until a random battle triggers, or you want to hope a random battle doesn't trigger. Where's my save points? In Final Fantasy VII Remake, there's a guy. Let's choose whether or not to fight him. Like, thank you. You know, like, the Tales of games on the PS1 were random encounters, but then starting on, like, GameCube and PS2, you'd see shadows on the field, fight them or don't.
Yeah.
and it's a lot less random and a lot more just kind to the players in that regard.
Yeah, I am generally okay with the trend. First of all, it allows a classic title to be played on modern architecture. So that's a big thing for me. Like, having easy accessibility to a classic game, in any form, is a great thing. As much as I'm a collector and I have all these old systems, I kind of wish I didn't. Like, I kind of wish I could play everything easily on
Yeah.
and have a good experience, on just a single platform. But that's not the case. I own all of these things because some of my favorite experiences are on them, and they haven't been topped.
Oh, and one other thing I should mention, by the way, this doesn't quite line up with being topped, but remastering or even porting a classic title will raise awareness of its existence,
Yeah.
and could potentially pave the way for a sequel. Like Resident Evil 3 Remake, there was no way that would have happened at all if Resident Evil 2 Remake hadn't been so wildly successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And RE3 was never a big game to begin with. It was only it was one of the lesser
It was originally going to be a guiding
titles.
game.
Yeah, it was one of those. Even amongst Resident Evil fans, like Resident Evil 3 never really got as much attention as a lot of the other titles. So it was cool to see that Capcom even wanted to put some life into it. Unfortunately, it seems kind of divisive, but I'd rather have it than not. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, like I look forward to trying it out in 2045.
Yeah, I'm going to have to finish 2. I'm only like most of the way through Claire. So
Yeah, I'm going through Resident Evil games more slowly than I'd like. The last one I've Let's Played was 0. So
what's next on the docket?
A non-numbered title. Like I think I forgot what comes first. Maybe it was either like Dead Aim or Outbreak. Outbreak,
Okay.
I really might just skip. Those games are like crazy if you play them single player. Dead Aim is much more reasonable.
Yeah, and that has a story mode that's pretty interesting.
Dead Aim is a gun survivor game. Like the first gun survivor game is fucking jank, and its story mode is extremely mediocre. But like, whoa, Resident Evil in the first person.
Did you do Gun Survivor 2?
Yeah, it sucked.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's not very good. But Dead Aim I heard was pretty good. Although because I'm neurotic, there's a gun survivor game that comes before Dead Aim that I'll have to get to first.
With Dino Stalker.
Yeah.
Oh man, do you know who made those games? What company made those games? I know who published them, but
well, yeah, that's obviously Capcom. But no, I don't think I do.
So Kavia made those before they made Nier and Dragon Guard.
Oh, get out of here!
Yeah, so it's possible that Yoko Taro's did something on those.
Huh.
Yeah, because Kavia.
Are you sure? There's nothing about how horrible and fucked up war is.
I think the very last Kavia game was Nier, but they had some pretty good games before that. I mean, they had the Resident Evil Chronicles games, so, the Dark Side Chronicles, and
those are fantastic.
They're really good.
Umbrella Chronicles, like I didn't know what to expect going in, but that game blew me away.
Yeah, they really took the idea from like Gun Survivor and Dead Aim and really made a couple really good like alternate tellings of those games that in like gun form. It's so much fun.
Well, it's not alternate tellings of those games. It's alternate tellings of the number, like the main entries
of the
in
numbered
series.
titles. Yeah, I meant that.
But like what's cool about them is that they dropped the free movement. Which you could argue is a downside, but the thing with on a rail shooters is that the camera angles are perfect every time because that's the only thing you're allowed to see. And now that it's on the Wii, you have one-to-one movements. You're not at the mercy of your cursor. Just flick your wrist and you're there. It's great.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like I said, I don't like
remakes,
it when,
by the way.
I don't like it when content is taken out. Generally speaking, I don't mind when they try to add a section to a game. Like they added the orphanage to Resident Evil 2, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah,
I
that
thought that was
certainly
great.
wasn't a thing before. Yeah,
Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. And
and
they
it had
did
more
something
to do
really
with
neat
Chief
there.
Irons instead of like one cutscene that your character ever
Oh,
sees him.
he's terrifying in the new game.
Yeah, so I've heard, but like
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the one cutscene where your character meets him, his voice actor like overacts, so it sounds goofy. And then the only other time you see him is when he gets killed. But like, he's got like a whole plot thing going on in the remake that's like you don't want to be around him. He's fucked up. Like, cause
Yeah.
in the original Resident Evil 2, you meet him once, and then everything you learn about him indicates that he's fucked up. But you get like the genuine article in remake.
Yeah, but just like anything else, it has to be well done and well thought out. I don't like it when I kind of like it when you can still play both games and it's a lot of fun. Like with Resident Evil 2 remake, Resident Evil 2 remake does not replace Resident Evil 2.
No, they're different games.
They're different games. They tell the same story, but they have different gameplay. It's a different experience. So I like that. I think that's a lot of fun because you can still go back and play the old one.
You get to play the game for the first time for the second time.
What I don't like is when a game tries to replace, like a remake tries to replace a new one or an old game, and then completely falls flat on its face, and you still want to just play the old one.
Yes.
I think that's a waste. So that happens occasionally, like when MDK and MDK2 were brought over to their HD versions. You could still buy the old versions on Steam, and like the old versions are better.
And
like,
this is a weird thing to mention, but like Chex Quest HD, very mediocre.
Yeah, no, the original
Very mediocre.
The original Doom Engine game is a lot more fun.
Yeah.
It's the new one just feels very cheap, whereas the old one is just Doom.
It's very stiff, and the enemies walk toward you slowly like zombies. It feels off. It's very off.
Yeah,
the soundtrack's great. The soundtrack is like the old game soundtrack, but redone. I like that quite a bit. But like a screenshot of new Chex Quest looks gorgeous, but the old game is the one to play.
But you have other ones like Saints Row the Third just came out with a remastering. I mean, that's a perfect game to get a remastering. I mean, it's just going to look better and run better. That's great. I mean, and that was a fun game to begin with. So there's no reason to play the old one. I like it when it replaces. I like it when it makes distinct versions. I don't like it when it just falls flat on its face. But
one other thing I'll mention, by the way, is
go ahead.
Yeah, is that Resident Evil 1 remake was really cool because Lisa Trevor was apparently content that they wanted in the original Resident Evil but didn't make it. So, in a way, Resident Evil 1's remake is restoring what was otherwise lost content. So that's really cool, too. You get something that was intended to be there, but couldn't be. It's kind of like how in Resident Evil 0, the remaster, the HD remaster, they give you a whole bunch of costumes, and one of them, just to be cute, is Rebecca's like N64 prototype costume. It's like, if you know about this, you'll like it. Or same thing with Resident Evil 2's remake. Claire has an Elsa Walker costume from like what was going to be Resident Evil 2 and is now known as Resident Evil 1.5. It's just a little wink, like, this game never came out, but you know what, here you go. Like, I appreciate stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I like that too.
And even White Day. I mentioned White Day on CoreCon. They have alternate costumes that are like your polygonal skins from the Korean game that never made it here. That's another thing. The remake of White Day is what the West got. We never even got the original game officially, so that it's also a good way of bringing in not only new audience from a generational perspective, but from a regional perspective. Like, what's White Day? Like, unless you do deep diving or you heard about it somewhere, there's no way you would have known that because it's exclusive to one country.
I mean, and then there are certain remakes that are so good, like, you wouldn't even want to play the original again. Like Black Mesa, for instance. It's an official fan remake basically, but like there's no reason to go back to the original Half-Life except for academic purposes, because even though that's a lot of fun, Black Mesa does everything and does it better. And it does things that it reworks the entire last section of the game to make it fun when it really wasn't in the original.
Yeah, Zen was almost like an afterthought in the original game.
And which is a shame, because it should be the climax. It should be the most exciting part of the end of the game should be the most exciting part of the game, other than the very beginning. Yeah. The first level and the last level should be your best levels.
Well, no. By the way, speaking of versions of the game that make the previous one like irrelevant, it's not exactly a remake, but Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. Now you can control the camera. Holy shit, everything is different.
Nobody ever wants to play the original version of Snake Eater. Nobody.
And it's funny, because if you play Metal Gear Solid 2 and you get used to its controls, it's great. And then you play Snake Eater. It's the next game in the series. It's great. But once you can control the camera, there is no going back.
It is impossible to play. In fact, I would go ahead and, like, if you play like the HD versions, they're all versions of Subsistence. So like,
yeah,
it's very hard to even imagine playing it like Metal Gear Solid 2. Like, just like overhead the entire time, and like
the only reason you go back to OG MGS3 is for like the ape escape thing, or was that Subsistence too?
No, that was in Subsistence as well. There's literally no reason to go to the original version. It's just like it was so indelible of how the game should have been originally, that like
I got another one.
Reason, yeah.
I got another one. System Shock 1, and I'm not talking about the new remake, although that looks cool as shit. But that's like Resident Evil 2. It's like it's two different games. I mean, like, it's still a first-person shooter, so I guess you could argue it could replace the original. But what I'm talking about is version 1 of System Shock 1 and version 2 of System Shock 1. Do you know the difference?
Mouse look?
No, that was recent. That was a Night Dive Studios thing.
Oh, okay.
Although, actually, okay, you know what? You got me. Version 3 of System Shock 1. Once you go mouse look, you really don't go back. But
you don't want to go without mouse look anymore.
No, but do you know what the difference with version 2 was?
I can't even think of it.
Voice acting in the audio logs.
Oh, yeah.
Because in System Shock 1, they're just text, but the voice acting's very, very interesting, and it's actually pretty good. And in System Shock 2, could you imagine playing System Shock 2 where all those audio logs were text, where all the Shodan messages to you were text? It's just not the same. Like, it's not.
Did you know that they made it a mission to get Shodan's voice actor for the remake?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they said it was a byline of the things that they needed to accomplish, and it was like the first one.
Yeah, I mean, she like is System Shock 2, and I still have to play System Shock 1, but I'd imagine she's most of System Shock 1 as well.
Yeah, so it's just really cool. I don't know if she fits into. I imagine they would want her for System Shock 3, but we know even less about that.
System Shock 2?
No.
There is a possibility for Shodan to be in System Shock 3. Let's just go with that.
Yeah, like I can imagine.
I mean, like, System Shock 2 clearly has an ending, but there's room to make a third game if we wanted to. So it's one of those.
Yeah, I mean, unlike movies, movies are a passively made thing that like is experienced by a really large audience. When you're performing things and playing something and have direct control over it, you just want it to enhance those abilities of control and of experience. So video games, like movies, like you hardly ever can say that a remake is better. There are exceptions, but you can like the vast majority of remakes are not as good.
A lot of the better remakes are reinterpretations. Like, if John Carpenter's The Thing was just a better acted thing from another world, it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. But by and large, by and large, you don't want to see old movies messed with. You don't want to see them like with new scenes put in or
Well,
new
no.
technology
You know what
put
the
in.
best you know what the best example is? The Vince Vaughn remake of Psycho, which is just like
Yeah, well, why watch that?
completely shot for shot. Like, you know how it's like, why are you making this? I could just watch the old one, but like, I don't know what's different about the new one. But in the Vince Vaughn thing, like, I mean, obviously the actors are different, but like, it tries so hard to be identical to the original movie that like,
Except for
seriously,
one
what's the
detail.
point?
Except for one detail. Yeah.
To see if you could do it.
Yeah.
Why did you do this?
It's more like a fan, like a film student.
Well, I was actually going to mention, like,
exercise.
it's something that makes me think of. I mean, you're going with film student. You're going a little more upper class. I was going to say it seems like something a high school project would do.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm going to do my own like fight scene from the Matrix. I like it's just what I mean. It's cool because you're the one physically doing it. But other than that, like, just watch the old movie.
Yeah, that's really it. Like, it's one of those things. Like, if it's like who remakes a book too? You know, nobody remakes a book. I'm gonna rewrite this book.
I mean, there's a law against that.
No, but like, what I mean is like nobody does a remake of a book. Like,
I can't even think of like an author. Well, there is one example I could think of. Literally one. There are
like
probably
Stephen
more.
King, the first Dark Tower book.
That is
basically
precisely it.
Yeah,
you got me. You found me out.
Yeah, he's just like, I need to fix this.
You got it in one. But even then, that was the same author doing their own work again, like a new a final draft instead of. So, well, I mean, I suppose there are cases where movies change aspects of a book. Actually, here's a funky one. Ian Fleming's James Bond, like the book versus the movie, where like I think the first movie and the third movie corrected some things from the books. Like one of them, some super hardcore gun expert had written into Ian Fleming saying,
I think it's From Russia with Love. Probably
what?
the second book and second movie, From Russia with Love.
Maybe that's what it was. Yeah, he was saying Bond wouldn't use a Beretta. That wouldn't make sense for the kind of work he does. He would probably use a PPK. So in the movie, they had like the guns guy go like, Mr. Bond, we're reissuing you with this, and he's like, well, grumble, 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 and they you know, that's how they did it. And in Goldfinger, apparently in the book,
From Russia with Love is the fifth novel, and
but it is the
movie.
second movie.
Yeah.
But in Goldfinger, Goldfinger's big plan was to steal all the gold from Fort Knox, and the movie addresses how fucking stupid that is. And Bond was like, the gold weighs 1,000,000 bajillion tons. You would need 1,000,000 bajillion men and 1,000,000 bajillion trucks. Who knows how many hours this shit would take? And that's when, in the movie, Goldfinger was like, who said I was planning on doing that? I'm going to irradiate the gold to make it useless for the West and increase the value of my own gold. And it's like, you know, that's amazing.
Not a bad idea.
that is a plan. And I remember seeing, I forgot who showed it to me. It was either Perry or you, but one of you had found some article of like which Bond villain had the most realistically executable and potentially successful plan. And yeah, that was the one.
Yeah, I mean all the rest of them are like.
Yeah, I'll shoot a space laser.
Casino Royale's pretty realistic.
Well, Casino Royale isn't like world domination. It's like it's gambling for money, and Bond got in the way. That wasn't a big grand villain plan. That was literally gambling for money.
A bad guy was trying to save his own skin and couldn't.
Yeah, I mean that's realistic in the sense that like if you need money quick, risk it at the casino, I guess. But like talking about a grand villain plan, behold my master plan. Like Goldfinger's hands down best.
Yeah. I mean, nothing that Blofeld ever did was
realistic. I mean, Casino Royale was really interesting in that the villain himself was under pressure from another group. So, like, the villain is, like, terrified the entire time, just not of Bond.
Yeah, I need
that
to
was
go
interesting
back
by itself.
I need to go back and watch some more of the classic ones. I've only ever seen Goldfinger, and
Goldfinger holds up surprisingly well. The only thing that really makes me laugh, this just gets me, is when Goldfinger had all the gangsters from the various places in the United States together, but they're all talking like how you would write 1940s or 50s gangsters. Oh, what's the big idea, Goldfinger? It's so good. It's amazing.
All of the Sean Connery movies are pretty good, right?
I had a pretty rough time with Thunderball, but otherwise I would say yes.
Wait, isn't that the fake one?
No, that was the one that was remade into the fake one, which was Never Say Never Again, which also had Sean Connery, and apparently that one sucks too.
So Thunderball
and Thunderball both are not very good.
And both starring Sean Connery, right?
Some people like Thunderball quite a bit. I wasn't into it, but I liked the other ones.
But most of the Sean Connery ones are good. They only get really goofy with what's his name?
Roger Moore is straight up silly.
Roger Moore. Yeah,
I will say this though, like, if you're not very familiar with the Bond movies, beware, because my first Bond experience was the Pierce Brosnan stuff, and those were effectively action movies. So when I watched
only the first one's really good.
What?
If you ask me, the GoldenEye's the only good one. If you ask me,
I still like Tomorrow Never Dies quite a bit, but yeah.
I mean, Tomorrow Never Dies has its charms,
it
but
does.
it's not
but,
good.
But where I'm going with this, though, is I watched the Pierce Brosnan movies, and there's shooting and explosions. And then I went back and watched Dr. No on, I think it was TV. At the time, I was like in high school or something, I couldn't make it through it, because it was so slow. But like watching it back as an adult, I actually like it quite a bit, because it's not boring, it's deliberate. He's doing spy shit. Like, there's a whole scene where he's in a hotel and he's looking for hidden cameras and stuff like that, and it's very slow and deliberate, and he's not doing flips and jumping out of windows. It's not the point. He's a spy. He's spying.
Yeah. I want to go back and watch the George Lazenby one, because apparently that one's good.
That one is good, yes.
Yeah. Which one's that? Diamonds Are Forever, or
no?
Her Majesty's
this is gonna bother me. Yes, that's.
Okay.
I think that's it. On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Yes.
Yeah. That's like the one that a lot of Bond fans like look back on and say, like, this is the lost gem. Like, this is the one that nobody talks about. That's really good.
Yeah, it's the Bond movie that had the guy who played Bond the one time. It's weird.
Timothy Dalton only got 2 times, which is kind of a shame, because I thought he was a good Bond.
He wasn't bad.
Yeah,
but he makes a much more entertaining villain, I think.
Oh, he's a slasher, a price slasher.
A slasher of prices. Catch me later. Oh, you have all. What was it like? Like someone like, you know all sorts of information. I bet if we bashed your head open, all sorts of secrets would come tumbling out. It's like, Jesus Christ, dude, really? It's so annoying.
For a while there, I thought out of the 3 movies, Shaun of the Dead was the best, but more and more every time I see it,
Shaun of the Dead is wonderful, but like Hot Fuzz, goddamn.
Hot Fuzz is a true motherfucking classic.
You know what really got me? This was a deep cut that like nobody got, including me. Do you remember that one woman who had the annoying laugh?
Oh, yeah.
There was the one part where she's talking to Timothy Dalton. It's like, oh, if only my heart would drink as deeply, or whatever. And like this, like, what the fuck? Apparently, that was a callback to The Rocketeer, where she was in that movie. She was also playing a bad actress, and she delivered that line to Timothy Dalton, who himself was an actor, but he was a good actor. And it's like, now do the take. And she read that awful line, and Timothy Dalton just, his smile just disappears. He's just like, oh god, really? Like, this is the person who's acting with me? Like, cut. So like, they brought fucking that back in Hot Fuzz, and nobody got the joke because nobody watched The Rocketeer.
Rocketeer really holds up, by the way. You should.
Apparently that's
Disney
quite
Plus.
a good movie, but like,
yeah.
They did a deep cut to The Rocketeer? Really? Like, that's amazing.
Jennifer Connelly in that and everything.
Yeah.
Really good stuff. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, we
we're
are off the rails.
off the rails. But I had a blast this episode. I want to
Yeah.
thank that's we haven't had a question from
Yeah,
Kurogachi
Kurogachi.
before. So thank you very much for participating.
Mm-hmm.
This was a good topic here. So that is the show for this week. We want to thank all of our fans who contributed questions and also made comments this week. Thank you so much. Everybody's been really good lately. I don't know whether it's because people have more time to. I suspect that might be part of it. But thank you so much. It's really lately been a lot of fun interacting with you. Please remember to subscribe to the Corrective Consciousness YouTube and SoundCloud pages. While there, please keep us supplied with awesome topics by submitting questions of your own via the YouTube and SoundCloud pages. And always remember, and I'm sure you do, that we read basically every comment that comes our way.
Yeah, like we don't respond to them, or at least I mean, I'm really the one who runs the
textually.
YouTube thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't respond to the comments in text. I do apologize for that. But every comment would probably, every response I make would probably be the same thing anyway. Thank you. I'll talk
Yeah.
about this in the episode. So we address them out loud.
Yeah, I think it's more intimate that way, actually.
Yeah, it feels a lot more artificial to copy paste thank you on every comment. It's like, is this a bot? What is this?
I'd rather everybody get their like our fans are part of the show, so you get your own little spotlight and your voice heard. So we love having that. While there, please give us thumbs ups, likes, and 5-star ratings on iTunes. It helps promote and spread awareness of the show, and any bit of encouragement helps keep the show going. You can also catch us on Tuesday for our sister podcast, Reactive Consciousness, the in-depth look at this week in our lives. Finally, you can friend me as vysethebold on pretty much anything.
And you could follow me on my YouTube channel, Lotus Prince. You could hit me up on Twitter at Lotus Prince. And finally, if you are interested in seeing my videos early, getting in on exclusive live streams, selecting upcoming games for me to Let's Play, or getting in conversations with me and other patrons on Discord, then perhaps consider swinging by my Patreon account, which can be found at patreon.com/LotusPrince.
All right, everybody. Well, we will catch everybody next week with another episode of Reactive Consciousness on Tuesday. Catch you then.
Until next time, everyone.
Bye-bye.